welcome to IDAGIO Live. My name is Kirill Gerstein. I'm a pianist, and this is my view across the keyboard. And the idea here is to, in a very informal setting, to look at different recordings that we now have at our fingertips using a service such as IDAGIO. And one of the great things for me, and I think for everybody, is the chance to discover the things that are not at the front page of these services and on the banners, but things that are deserving of our attention and our listening time, but perhaps don't pop up immediately. And this week I was listening to the Piano Concerto in F minor by Adolphe von Henselt, or as they would call him in Russia, Henselt, because in the Russian language, many of the H's become G's, like Gamburg and Gorovets. In any case, Mr. Henselt was a very interesting figure. He was a colleague and a contemporary of Schumann, Liszt, Chopin, Alkan. He was born in that quite amazing 5-year period between 1809 and 1814 is when Adolphe von Henselt himself is born. 1811, as you know, Liszt is born. And so this is an amazing period for the poets of the piano and the people that really made the 19th century piano playing into what it became. And of course, we know the concertos of Liszt, we know the concertos of Chopin, but I think interesting to look, and this is why I wanted to mention Mr. Henselt today, is the whole surrounding, the musical surrounding of the time. And there are more concertos to be discovered aside from the very famous ones. And of course, these pieces go in and out of fashion. And the Henselt F minor concerto, which I wanted to concentrate on today, was actually a piece that was very popular with a number of pianists from the Golden Age. Sergei Rachmaninoff played the piece as a young man. Ferruccio Busoni played the piece. Franz Liszt knew the piece very well. The premiere of the F minor Henselt concerto was given by Clara Schumann in 1844, the famous virtuosa, composer herself, and of course the wife of Robert Schumann. So the concerto had a glorious history, and when you listen to it, and I hope you will look at the little playlist that I made for this week for Adolphe von Henselt, and use it as a departure point to delve into these different directions that we'll mention. When you listen to it today, I think it is not quite clear why the concerto is so little present in our mind. And I think that is the point, that next to the Chopin F minor concerto, there are pieces like this. Before the Chopin F minor and the E minor concerto, there is the Hummel concerto, or concerti rather, and Hummel, of course, is kind of a link between Mozart, who was Hummel's teacher, and Chopin, who really learned a lot. And when you hear the concerto, and I might even play a couple small examples on the piano here, you might say, well, it sounds like Chopin, but I don't think the idea is that it is derivative. It is just of that time that produced the Chopin concerto, other pieces by Chopin, certainly by Liszt. And Liszt, as I'll mention later, was a big admirer of Henselt. Even some of the comments have a tinge of jealousy. I think he's known to have said to his students, I could have had velvety paws the way Henselt has them. Henselt was incidentally an obsessive practicer. And the concerto opens like this. And you might think that the bass of the progression is something you've heard before in a very famous piece. So this bass there's the Rachmaninoff prelude. Which, of course, the Rachmaninoff prelude he used to call the It prelude, because people at his North American concerts apparently, reportedly, used to shout, "Play It" for encore, and that was to be the C-sharp minor prelude. The reason why I make the connection that may be tenuous between this prelude and the piano concerto is that Rachmaninoff studied with a very significant teacher in Russian music history, Nikolai Zverev. And Mr. Zverev, who was also a teacher of Joseph Levine and Scriabin, as well as Rachmaninoff himself, Mr. Zverev studied with von Henselt, and this is the reason why I, at the start of this little conversation, mentioned the Henselt and the Genselt, as he would be known in Russia, because in the late 1830s, in 1838, Mr. Henselt was invited to come to St. Petersburg and became the piano teacher for the imperial family. And later on, he became the inspector general for pianoforte playing of all the imperial music institutions in Russia, of which there were several in St. Petersburg, in Moscow, and in other cities. So in this way, his influence on the so-called Russian piano playing school is immense. And so there you have a German composer who was a student of Hummel, and so there's a lineage to Mozart himself, is in some way one of the fathers of the Russian piano school. So I think it makes a lovely mess of the whole idea of nationalist schools of instrumental playing, and also, as we see, of composition, because Rachmaninoff was certainly influenced by Henselt's music. And on the playlist that I've made, there is also a wonderful encore-like piece, an etude by its title, by Henselt, that Rachmaninoff recorded himself in 1923, and it's called "If I Were a Bird, I'd Fly to You." And I hope you'll listen to that little fluffy bonbon as well. And let's hear a little bit. I will play a little bit of the concerto in the recording with orchestra, rather than my attempt at the piano reduction. And this is the recording with Raymond Lowenthal, and Charles Mackerras is conducting. This is the beginning. So it begins, and you can see a picture of Mr. Henselt if I manage to do the screen sharing properly, which is wonderful when it works. And there he is. This is Mr. Henselt in 1866. This is incidentally from the National Portrait Gallery, and I love that it says "famous musician." And indeed, he was very famous. And one more little excerpt that I wanted to play on the piano for you is this beautiful section in the middle that is called Religioso, and another beautiful moment in the piece. piano enters in a very heroic way. Connecting to the next recording that I would like to show you, that is also on the playlist. Here's the beginning of the slow movement. I think also, again, very beautiful. Some people may be reminded of Chopin. And this is the theme of the slow movement. The orchestra starts like this. And then starts the piano. The recording that I added to the playlist alongside of the piano concerto itself is a transcription of the second movement for solo piano. And this was, of course, a very common trend that composers, Liszt perhaps being one of the most famous examples, but also all the 19th and early 20th century pianists made transcriptions of things they wanted to play. So this transcription of the second movement is made by a pianist named Michel Zadora, or sometimes Michel von Zadora, who studied with Leschetizky in Vienna. Leschetizky being a student of Czerny, so you are one step away from Beethoven. And later, Michel von Zadora went to study with Busoni, who was mentioned on last week's episode, and you can see that playlist. I think those still stay up, as well as the conversation about him. So Mr. Zadora, whose picture I'll show you to in a moment, made this very beautiful transcription of the slow movement. And here is that, and here's Mr. Zadora. This is how he looked. There's Mr. To show you a letter of Franz Liszt talking about that. You can see that he writes, for 30 years I've entirely abstained from any reaction melodies, whatever. Nevertheless, I willingly make an exception to my often thanking you for a kind word, begging you to transmit to my honored friend, renowned diplomatist, once said to me, to princes one should offer only flowers gathered from their own gardens, since it belongs to the princess, accept a souvenir of one of the most beautiful flowers of noble gardening. There you have it. Zadora's performance, and I hope you'll hear the rest of this particular recording and in fact the rest of the acoustic recordings that we have of Zadora are very, very elegant and noble examples of piano playing. Raymond Lowenthal is interpreter that I also hope you delve into his discography. Aside from the Henselt concerto, he was known to lead the Romantic revival in the, say, second half of the 20th century, and he made a number of important recordings of Alkan's piano music, of Liszt, of course, and this Henselt, Charvenka, all the names of 19th century piano lore that perhaps one could criticize that, well, not all of it is so-called first-rate music. Well, this is not as good as Chopin, but I don't think that is the point. I think we have a lot of beautiful flowers from a number of gardens in our repertoire as pianists particularly. And now that all these things are literally a finger tap away, I think they need to be discovered, because even a masterpiece like the Liszt E flat major concerto or the Chopin E minor, you name it, periodically needs some rest also from perhaps from our ears. And so there you can turn the attention to other figures that were their colleagues. And perhaps before we sign off for today, I'll play a little bit of that Rachmaninoff performance of the Henselt etude. Of course, Rachmaninoff's recordings don't need much of a recommendation, because these are some of the best examples of piano playing and music making ever recorded. But I hope our program here and my talking suggests some avenues and smaller windy streets that can be taken as navigation suggestions, and hopefully something along the way will attract the ear. You can follow me on all the possible and impossible social media platforms, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and the ideas, especially if you use the hashtag view across the keyboard. Send your questions, send your suggestions, send your objections, just say hello. And I hope to see you here again, wherever here may be, in a week's time, next Monday, again at 7 o'clock Central European time. And I'll be thinking in the meantime, what should I suggest that we listen to together next week? Until then, be well, stay healthy, and I hope you have a good time listening to IDAGIO Live and to all the recordings that are available here. Thank you.